The third title, does it matter that your personal circumstances influence how seriously your knowledge is taken? Well, when we start defining our terms, we really need to look quickly at, or right away at knowledge, the notion of knowledge being taken seriously. We can use historical development in the knowledge framework as an avenue by which to see which knowledge in history has been taken seriously and how knowledge has developed in a particular area through its being taken seriously. There should be quite a number of examples across all areas of knowledge of that. Interesting also would be to consider knowledge that wasn't taken seriously, and are there any examples where knowledge that wasn't taken seriously at one time meant that the historical development of that area became impeded or delimited until a later stage of time when knowledge was taken seriously, was revisited, and then a paradigm was completely changed, or some other significant events took place due to knowledge that had previously not been taken seriously to then being taken seriously. Okay, so that could be one interesting way of looking at the historical development of knowledge. I think you could define the notion of knowledge being taken seriously. You would need to sort of say, what are the synonyms for that? The adoption of knowledge or inclusion in a certain canon. Are there other synonyms for it? And then to define it also in terms of what it is not. So, knowledge that is not being taken seriously. What is that? What is that process when we are not taking certain knowledge seriously? And there would be many examples that you could look at, including myth in history studies or in the human sciences. We wouldn't take myth very seriously if we are talking about historical knowledge. However, in a different area of knowledge, we might take that same knowledge more seriously. So myth is taken more seriously in the arts, for example, perhaps in the human sciences, in psychology, and the archetypes, Jung's archetypes, and so forth. Also, the notion of not taking knowledge seriously could be viewed in terms of skepticism, skeptical inquiry. It could be, you could have examples of myths that have been debunked. Also, we can consider knowledge not being taken seriously. Who would we not take knowledge seriously? Well, we would take it not seriously from kids and people that don't know about that particular discipline. However, are there times when such groups, such ignorant groups, children, people that don't know certain things, are there times when they should actually be taken seriously? Okay? And they're not due to the perception that they're not worthy of serious consideration. Are there times when ignorant persons should be taken seriously? Are there those times? Can we think of any examples of that? So, in I don't know, rape cases or in cases that involve children, legal cases that involve children, do those children do their testimony? Does it get taken seriously? Do women's testimonies about rape to the police, is that taken seriously? Right? And when are these cases not being taken seriously? Is it due to the perception of those persons that they are women and therefore they shouldn't be taken seriously when you've got a patriarchal culture, or that they're just kids and kids lie, they over-exaggerate, and so they're not really worthy of serious consideration? Does that perception blind or bias the consideration about how serious to take the testimony or how serious to take what's being shared, right? This could all be put under the umbrella of how should personal knowledge be evaluated against shared knowledge when we are sharing personal knowledge based on our personal circumstances. How do we evaluate that personal knowledge against a shared knowledge system? That would be an umbrella, KQ. We would also need to define your personal circumstances, right? So how are personal circumstances to be defined? What connections can be drawn between personal circumstances and personal knowledge? That might be interesting. When do personal circumstances influence how seriously our personal knowledge is taken in a discourse involving shared knowledge, right? So what are personal circumstances? How are we going to define those? Well, it could be gender. It could be status and wealth. Certainly, a big one is going to be the differences in education and levels of expertise. And there's a fine example there between climate scientists and laypersons. Climate scientists have the expertise, laypersons, but maybe more interesting would be politically motivated persons who are using climate science as a propaganda tool for or against climate change. And people that are obviously using it as a propaganda tool, does that mean that we don't take that seriously anymore because now it's a propaganda tool? Or how do we evaluate that? Right? There's also the idea of the fallacy of expert, the fallacy of the expert. You could look that up and see when it is that experts are ignored. And certainly in climate science, there is a notion of this kicking around the place. Whether you're a student or a teacher, if you're a student, as an IB student, are you taken seriously? Does the IB curriculum and your opportunities inside the IB schools, does it allow you to feel like your opinions are worth something? And when is it that your opinions are worth something? We'll get to that in a minute. Age is certainly a personal circumstance. You could review people whose work was taken seriously versus those whose work was not taken seriously and look at why the difference. Are there any circumstances when personal circumstances should influence how seriously personal knowledge is taken? Right. So where we come from, a particular cultural background, what our gender is, and possibly what our work is involving. All of that is going to influence and bias our work in different areas of knowledge. So, are there times when those personal circumstances should influence how seriously it is? And certainly when we do literary analysis and we look at the author's personal circumstances, often we can gain a richer understanding of an artifact in the arts. Does that same reasoning apply to a scientist, to a mathematician, to a historian? Is personal knowledge, are their personal circumstances valid when we are evaluating how worthy their knowledge is? Why shouldn't personal circumstances be a factor of influence on our regard for knowledge? Right? Why shouldn't it be a factor? So this question is really going after the idea that when women make certain scientific discoveries, they are not given the same accolades, fairness, treatment, monetary rewards, or fame, or respect as what men are given. That's certainly changing as we're becoming more aware of this, but we're a long way from not having that prejudice. So you could look at that as one aspect of your argument. Implications that we could draw could be, if personal circumstances shouldn't be a factor of influence, well, then what factors should influence our regard for knowledge? When should knowledge be taken seriously if we're going to not include personal circumstances? And that's certainly when you can go after what you've been learning in the human sciences and the natural sciences with the OPVL and the scientific method. These frameworks and processes are specifically designed to create objectivity, to minimize the negative effects of bias, which is due to personal circumstances. So certainly you can look at how these two vehicles of processing knowledge try to get an objective view. What are the consequences when differences in personal circumstances limit researchers' inclusion in the development of knowledge? So, what might happen when you've got an uneducated person who makes a scientific discovery, and you've got a very highly educated person who makes a scientific discovery? Which one of those persons is going to be validated? Whose knowledge will be more likely to be validated? Now, obviously the answer is going to be that we are more biased in favour of the educated person who makes that scientific discovery and claims that scientific discovery. Well, what happens when we do that? What happens when we weigh in favour of the better personal circumstances? And then you could have an interesting example, and I just can't remember who the particular people are involved. Galileo and someone before him or someone after him. It's mentioned in Cosmos. So if you can go back and look in the first episode of that, you will see the story of these different scientists who discovering astronomy for the first time, making the first giant leaps in astronomy. And there were people amongst these scientists who were not coming from the elite universities, Cambridge and Oxford and what have you, but were doing it on their own and making these discoveries. Now, if they were ignored, continued to be ignored, then those discoveries may not have surfaced. Something like this could be possible. What happens, and then what other implications? What happens when knowledge is taken very seriously? And you could look at climate change examples, nuclear examples, ecosystem examples. Anything from the arts? 1984, the book 1984, The Prophecies of Brave New World, etc. When this artistic fictional knowledge is being taken seriously, then we do get a better understanding of our political and historical moment. Okay, those are just some thoughts there for you.